Bon dia a tothom. Estem encantades de tornar a Barcelona. Viviu una ciutat molt bonica, and that's it. We are very grateful to be here. We love your city, and we love the people in the city, and the schools that we've met, the people that we've met are just fantastic. We apologize that we're going to be speaking in English, and we make a commitment that we'll know a few more words in Catalan when we come back next time. The comments from your director were absolutely right on, and what we'd like to do in the time that we've got together is reinforce why the direction of the department is so wise. And some of the things that we've learned over the 20 years that we've been working with networks that can reinforce the direction that you're taking. So just quickly, we do come from British Columbia, Canada, the far west coast. Hands up how many of you've been to Canada? Lots. And to British Columbia? Okay, great. And our province, in our country, education is provincial. So we're talking about our experience in British Columbia as part of a federal system. And we work, live, and play on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. And that's a very important part of our tradition, is to acknowledge who we are and where we're from. The context is that we're about the size of Catalonia, really, in terms of population. And we have many newcomers in our population or in our schools, as well as the complexity and the beauty of having many Indigenous groups. One of the things that we have learned, one of the important learnings that we apply within our networks, is that you show your influence by what you give away. And we'd really like to acknowledge the work of Begonia, who has written a beautiful article that was shared last week in Morocco and is going to be published in an international journal this spring. And her generosity in sharing her images, her metaphors, and the quality of her work is influencing not just schools in Catalonia and in Barcelona, but schools now in many, many parts of the world. And so one of our things is that we bring gifts to give away as well.
So, hola. Oh, let's hola, Linda. Two Catalan words. Yes, giving things away. I loved what your two department people had to say. And when we go back tomorrow, on Friday, we hope our department will say the same thing. It's taken us 20 years to get to where you are now. So in 5 years, you will have transformed your system. Give yourself a round of applause. Pat the person next to you and say, hola, wow. This present is slightly used. I've been reading it, and it has my name in it in pencil. But when I heard your plan about the facilitation, this is Helen Timperley's latest book. It's just published. It's a fantastic book on facilitation. It says, Leading Powerful Professional Learning, Responding to Complexity with Adaptive Expertise. That's where you're at. I'm going to pass it probably to Begonia, who will erase my name, take the clipping out of it, and you will use it for goodness. And the other thing I wish I still had, I gave it to some Moroccans, but we do have the handout that goes with the brand new decision-making playbook. And every single one of you, I think, will use. We saw in a school yesterday teaching for thinking that was state-of-the-art in the world. And those young people are already making decisions about gender fairness and how to be together in the world. But this book will give every young person in Catalan and every teacher, and all of these things are free on our website, will give them the tools to make smart decisions. And if there was ever a time in the world history that we need that, young people in the lead around the environment, it's now. So just pass that around. You can see the handout that goes with it. And then we brought some classic playbooks, some post of our work with an equity project, and the funniest and most alive person in our province. Her name is Shelley Moore. You can see her on the website. She's a storyteller, and she talks about how important it is to aim for the outside pins when you bowl. Aim for the kids who are the toughest to reach, and you will reach them all. And that is a very funny and exciting book, and all of her videos are online too. Oh, and then, Judy, you might want to talk about the famous wand.
And everywhere we travel, we bring a magic wand. And just to say where this came from, just hit it again, Linda. It makes such a lovely sound.
Well, you have to find the right material. And it doesn't ring if you're uptight, and you can ring it at both ends. That's nicer.
Yeah. We were in a school a few years ago, a small school in a rural part of our province, and the teachers were working together to take a look at samples of student writing. And one of the teachers was really struggling to find the pattern. And Linda, who has a strong background in literacy, was able to sit beside her, and within about a 10-minute conversation, the pattern was clear and the teacher knew what her next step was. And she was so grateful, her name was Jane, that she went down to her classroom and she brought back a wand and she gave it to Linda. We have since bought thousands of these and give them away everywhere we go. We're supporting the retirement of a childcare worker from California who's now living on the beach in Costa Rica, making musical wands out of coat hangers. But they represent to us the fact that this work is simply too hard to do alone. We need to work together. We need to work together as teachers and principals within schools. We need to work together across schools. And increasingly, we need to work across countries and nations. So we have 2 to give away. So at the end of the session, some of you will walk out with a little bit of magic. So just a little bit of background. We've been working, as Marta said, with a network of schools for the last 20 years. And we are reaching a lot of students and a lot of people in our province. And it has been kind of slow, steady work. But there's some evidence that it's making a difference, including, as Linda said on Friday, we're now part of a provincial initiative around school improvement that's involving the whole province. What we knew when we started the network, we knew some things 20 years ago, and we've learned some things since then. We knew it needed to be principals and teachers working together. And we really knew that it needed to be leadership by contribution, not by role. We knew it needed to be invitational, that in our context, if people were told what to do, they resisted. If they were invited, they became committed. We knew it needed to be inquiry-based, that we needed to come at the improvement work through curiosity. We knew that having simple, reliable structures really helped, so it wasn't too complicated. We knew that it needed to be public, that we needed to share our work at the end of a cycle. And in our context, we knew it was really important to acknowledge the contribution of schools. So at the end of every year where schools participate in the network, we've been able to send them a small grant just to say thank you. And that grant is about 250 euros. It may allow them to go out for lunch, but it's important as a way of saying thank you. So that's what we knew when we started this work. So where we are now is that we have networks based on these principles operating in many places around the world. And the key is that it's all voluntary and it's invitational and it follows the same principles. So what we've learned, and this is going to frame the comments that we're going to make between now and 1 o'clock, is the importance of these things, of having a shared purpose, of curiosity, of using a shared framework, of listening to learners, and teamwork and perseverance. So those are the points that we're going to try to make today.
How does that sound to you? Are you fascinated? Are you honest? Oh, good. Well, I see some nods, so that's a good thing. Well, you probably know at least one of these people. This is a slide from Morocco, and Begonia is listening intently to a young woman who's from Brazil. And Margaret Wheatley is one of our favorite thinkers, and she always says, change doesn't happen from the top, it doesn't really happen from the bottom. It happens when two people turn to each other who kind of like each other and are interested, have good eye contact and listening skills like this, and say, I've got an idea. What if Barcelona cooperated with a foundation in Brazil? Yes? That's really how things happen. David Istance, who some of you know from the OECD innovation work, he says, I'm not sure I love the word, but he says it's not the macro and it's not the micro, it's the meso. We just call that the center. The center is where teachers and learners and families and networks are working together. That seems to be the place that can create the kind of movement that actually helps thousands of kids instead of just some. Does that make sense to you? I mean, it's a new concept, really, in the literature. One of the Spanish-speaking people who work with Michael Fullen said he used his fist to show that we used to be always working in hierarchies, people at the top telling people below them what to do, teachers with kids, principals with teachers, systems. But now he says it's side by side. It's like this. And we very much in our province believe that that's the way we move things forward. And we think that you are well on your way in the Catalan to being able to get this done in 5 years, to switch from this top-down teaching where we're telling all the time to side-by-side teaching. We saw it at a local school yesterday. It was a beautiful sight. So we think that now this is part of our pre-doctoral postmasters teaching. We really believe this. When we do our university teaching, there are classroom teachers in our group of 32 that we see a week from now. There are superintendents, there are directors, there are people from the ministry, there are people who have roles, but we don't let them talk about their roles until about the 3rd or 4th session. We make them come to parties and sip wine and eat good food. We have this kind of content, but we believe this is something that really matters. To us, a system leader is any person who is in the learning system, the learning organization, who really cares about quality and equity combined. They have to be together. It can't be one over the other. All of the kids have to have a chance, and it has to be high quality, and that's why your work on assessment for learning, I see there's people in the audience who love that assessment for learning work, because we know how to lift kids if we make the learning progressions good. And look, learning by contribution, not role.
So this
wonderful Catalan dancing.
This is a metaphor that we've learned from you. So we'll just... So just turn to the person next to you and say, what does the Sardana have to do with leadership by contribution? And when you hear the magic chime, that's just a signal to stop talking.
1 minute. Talk to the person next to you.
So,
We're done at 12:30.
no, we're done at 1 o'clock. What's interesting is from 1 to 1:30. Sure. You might, well, why don't you double check with the phone, but that's what she said yesterday. So I think purpose is next, and if you do that, I think we're good.
Molto gracias.
So what we saw in the Sardana is that it's community. There is a wisdom holder that leads the work, but it's pretty much invisible to the observers as to who's leading and to who's following. So we just love this image, and if you didn't recognize it, that is Begonia. Encouraging us to participate, but we were too shy. So the big idea is that we all have a role to play, and we all make a contribution to this work.
So one of the things we would say from our networks, and the networks in Australia and Sweden, for example, and England, is you have to collectively decide on a shared purpose. Now, often governments do, and often ministries do, but it's the people who have to embrace or create these shared meanings. Do you believe that in the Catalan? I bet you do. And what we found is that we have to have those goals in a sense that the profession itself creates. We haven't found in 20 years of being in the international school improvement community that states that just tell people that they must improve, that captures the hearts of teachers. It has to be conversations where we capture each other's heart, because it's hard work. And so we use this acronym of HARD, that the goals have to be heartfelt. We have to bring them to life, and this is a very creative place, so that part's easy here. They have to be required by our conscience, our sense of ethics, and they have to be difficult. BC teachers are not motivated by tiny little, let's get it, the reading scores up by 1%. That doesn't capture their imagination. Our educators, and we would be amongst them, we're captured by big, hard goals, and we're just going to show you our three. We're not saying that they're perfect, but they do belong to the people. The first one that the network created was this one, that every young person, every learner in our province would cross the stage. We have a ceremony, we wear a hat and put it on and cross the stage, and that they'll cross the stage with dignity. They've always been treated well in school. They'll have a sense of individual purpose to make the world a better place, and they'll have genuine options for pursuing that purpose. So if they want to be a wonderful maker of tapas in Barcelona, they've got the culinary skills and the language skills that they can make that happen. We are passionate about this goal. We're getting closer, but we're not there yet. And it might take us our whole lives to get there, but we're determined collectively. That's our first goal. It's the biggest one. This was the second goal that came in to our work. And yesterday we heard from a wonderful educator in the meeting, in the workshop, who was doing the walking curriculum, taking her learners out every day and walking.
Is Yolanda here?
Nature.
She is.
You changed the color of your sleeve. She was in pink yesterday. I was going to say the pink sleeve lady. Wonderful example. And this morning I was reading about a teacher in Winnipeg who is out. Winnipeg is the coldest part of Canada. Right now in Edmonton and Winnipeg, it's minus 50 degrees. Minus 50 degrees.
50.
50. Minus 50 degrees. And we're going to be in Winnipeg next week. That teacher last year took her kids out every day, 184 days out of 185. So that's the beginning of being a powerful nature school. And those learners learned to be curious. So we want every learner, including every teacher who goes to retire, every teacher to be more curious than when he or she started, and every young person to be more curious than when they were 3, 4, 5, when they started school, to graduate with that sense of really wanting to learn more. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a goal that we can all embrace, and that's why inquiry-based teaching and the Transformation Lab is so important. And then this is our big equity goal. If you've been to Australia or Hawaii or New Zealand or Canada, you will know that the Indigenous people were colonized by the people who look like us, who came to steal their land. And that created a very bad period of history in our country that we are now trying to reconcile and restore justice. And part of it was the education system who took the language, the culture, the spirituality away, and the art. And now schools, as educators, we passionately believe that every learner in our province, adult and child, needs to gain an understanding of and respect for Indigenous worldviews. And so part of that, language is very important to you, language is very important to Indigenous people, and we are trying to learn every month a word or two in an Indigenous language that's on the territory that we do our work. So that's, in some ways it's unique, but I think cultures can substitute your own equity goal. In some countries, it's the refugee population. In England, it's probably the poor, particularly the poor families that have been on welfare for many years, and particularly the boys within that are a big equity concern. We think you have to have a goal that focuses on that, because that's where you get the heart for the work. Does that make sense to you?
So our encouragement then is that as you move into your networks and move into conversations in schools, that you start with the conversation of why. Like, why are we doing this work and why does it matter? We can leap into activities. We want to move to action, but we want to be really clear on what the purpose is. So that's number one, what we've learned. An encouraging thing for us is that these goals emerged from conversations in schools, and they're now being reflected in our provincial policies. So we can, as schools, influence government. These tackling issues of equity and inclusion and creating fairer societies, these are complex problems. If we knew the answers to them, we'd already be solving those problems. But we don't. And this is from Helen Timperley, and she says that those complex problems, the ones that we don't know the answers to, require adaptive expertise, new expertise, not the routine things that we learned in our teacher education programs, but expertise that we need to develop as a profession. And the only way those are developed is through collaborative inquiry. And we have seen, we really believe this, and that's why for us, the focus on the spiral of inquiry and collaborative inquiry is absolutely key if we're going to meet those big purposes. Our next big point is that the mindset that we bring as educators and the mindsets that we create and support and develop in young people are absolutely critical. And so we've been really influenced by the work of Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist from Stanford University, and her whole career has been dedicated to understanding how we can create the belief in young people that through their effort and with strategies and support, they can do better. She was influenced by her experience in 5th grade, and she starts her book with the story of her teacher, Mrs. Wilson, who sat the class by order of their IQ scores. That would be a traumatic thing to do. Anyway, the impact on her was that she stopped taking risks. And so we need to take a look at the labels, the way we talk to kids, and how we create this belief in them. And how, within schools, as the educators in the schools, we believe that we can get better if we work together, if we have support, and if we apply the right strategies. So the language that we use really tells families, tells children, we tell each other what we believe and what we value. And this is the image from a book called The Flight of the Hummingbird, which Begonia likes. We think that she actually reflects the hummingbird. And the hummingbird is a great story of growth mindset. So it is a story of a single bird, the hummingbird, in the midst of a terrible forest fire. So think about Australia right now. And all of the animals are running away from the fire. What the hummingbird is doing is taking a drop of water at a time in her beak and flying out to the fire and dropping it. And the other animals say, "What are you doing? You know, you're crazy. This is not going to make a difference." And she said, "It's the one thing I can do." So we think that the belief that through our efforts we can actually make a difference is something that we need to reinforce. So this is just a poster from one of the classrooms that we've been recently, and it's that making it really visible that the language that we use with our children helps reinforce their commitment to growth rather than seeing themselves as I'm good at this or I'm bad at this. Does that make sense? Okay.
And we will, of course, because we've learned from our Indigenous population that everything you have you should give away. So that's why we try to bring gifts to give away, and the slides will all become part of your repertoire. We want to learn with you, and however, I love putting my camera in the air and taking a picture of things right away. I don't like waiting until it gets done some other way. This is the learning pit. Has anybody used this idea in their classrooms in this setting? Very popular in Sweden. It's James Nottingham. He's an English student of Carol Dweck's, and he's created this idea of how learning takes place. That when you're first trying to learn Catalan, oh no, it's not as easy as it sounds when people are speaking it. And you're sort of confused because you remember a little bit of, in our case, a little bit of French, a little bit of Italian, a little bit of Spanish, and then, oh, I'm stuck, what do I do? And then you have a glass of wine and one of your tapas bars, and you try saying thank you to the waiter, and they smile and sort of give you a round of applause, and then you feel good. And then you get a bit of coaching from Begonia, a tape, and you listen to Judy saying it over and over as she tries to master it. And then when you get up, you see that the other side is higher than the pit at this side. You've got that sense of, hey, I did it. And that feels fantastic. Does that make sense to you as a metaphor? This is also very popular in Australian classrooms. And I think it is kind of how learning works. If you're trying something difficult, and you do need help, support, and strategies to get up that other side. But when you do, you feel terrific.
So if you think about the let's work together and the person leaning down to provide a hand, that's what your facilitators are going to be doing for you throughout this work. So we need to go through that place of confusion and uncertainty, and then through conversation and support, we can get there.
And Judy, maybe hot seat questioning at what time?
Yeah.
At what?
So
okay.
At 1 o'clock, we're going to stop, and then we'll take questions. So we want you to be thinking now about the questions that would be most helpful to you. We want to give a
But Judy, just before the example, I think because we do have time, right? And we believe in dialogue, and we love to hear you talking to each other. How many people have used growth mindset language and teaching in your classroom, your work? Whatever, growth mindset. Put your hand straight up so we can see. Okay, why don't you have a 2-minute conversation with the people sitting close to you? Just, does that idea make sense? Do you think in your department that having a growth mindset, are we in the pit or are we coming out the other side? Would that be useful? Is that a useful metaphor to teach young people in Catalonia or not? Just have a quick conversation and be as loud as you want because we like it to feel festive, okay, like a party. 2-minute conversation. What do you think of growth mindset?
Curiosity. And then we'll do the spiral together. All right. Okay.
Exactly. You have exactly the right attitude. The chime never means freeze or be totally quiet. It just means in the next couple of minutes, please bring your conversation to a quiet close. It doesn't mean stop, because the dialogue is important. How many people thought they might embrace the idea of growth mindset and a little bit of learning pit? Anybody?
Okay. So
Yeah.
at one point in my career, I was a counselor in a secondary school. And I would meet with parents and students at interview time. And if I had a euro for every time I heard either a parent or a child say, "I'm no good at this, I'm no good at math, I'm no good at French, I'm no good at Catalan," and that's because, my father wasn't or my mother wasn't. Like they attribute it to somewhere else, and we need to break that habit. So the growth mindset is around interrupting those patterns of saying, "I'm no good," and switching to, "I can get better." Now, one of our favorite examples is from a school in British Columbia. When we say BC, that's just a short form of British Columbia. So a school in British Columbia, the teacher was determined to develop a growth mindset, or more of a growth mindset, with her 12-year-olds. And she knew she needed to model it herself. So she started the year by saying, "Class, this year, I'm going to be asking you to learn all kinds of difficult things. We're going to do it together. It's going to be challenging, but you're going to make it." She said, "But it only seems fair that I learn something new this year too. And you can decide what it's going to be." So you can imagine the response of the 12-year-olds that they were going to assign a task to their teacher. So they went off into groups, and they were just having a blast, and they came back and they said, "Miss, we can't just assign you one. We've been watching you, and this year you need to learn 2 things." And they said, "We noticed that when you go to the gym, when you go to physical education, that you are not an active participant. So this year, you're going to learn to do a cartwheel." Do you know what cartwheel, how that translates? Okay. You're going to learn to do a cartwheel. "And we've also noticed that you are reluctant on social media. So we'd like you to tweet about it." And so she said, "All right, they had such a good time. The children brought her YouTube clips, they gave her coaching advice, they set up her phone, they got her a Twitter account, and her colleagues in the school thought she was crazy. They thought, why would anybody do that? However, what they saw over the year was how much fun that class was having and how much fun the teacher was having. And the next year they decided that they would all do it. But they made it a bit easier. They said at the beginning of the year, boys and girls, this year I'm interested in learning one of three new things. I'm interested in learning Spanish, I'm interested in learning to play the trumpet, I'm interested in learning to cross-country ski. And you can pick which one it is. And they voted, and each month at an assembly, the teachers demonstrated their new learning. It was never perfect, but they all got better. That pattern of sharing the learning between the teachers and the young people is changing the way schools are working in our province. So it's not only saying the words, it's doing the actions. So growth mindset, taking some risks, being open about our learning, not worrying about it being perfect, knowing we're going to go into the learning pit as we work through improving our schools is a natural, important part of this work.
So can you see that that's an example of working more like that? More like that, less like, we're all in here learning together. We now have many principals in British Columbia who are learning to play the ukulele. That seems to be a very popular choice. And each month they come out and play a few bad chords. But by the end of the year, they can, sing Blue Hawaii, kind of like Elvis, to their school. And people have some fun with it, which we know play is an important part of learning. So we really encourage you. I know there's some Knowledge Forum people in the room. The playfulness that we can bring to our schools is a really important part of learning too. I don't know if anybody has listened to Susan Engel. You can Google her name and find her. She's probably the best researcher in North America, the only one really we've been able to find, that have asked this question: how do teachers actually build curiosity? Because apparently on surveys we say it matters to us, but actually sometimes as teachers we're confused about how to go about building our own curiosity and the curiosity of young people. And so she used as the example of curiosity, she went into the class of 10-year-olds in the States with her graduate students, and they taped lessons and they watched for moments when young people voluntarily asked questions. We were in a school yesterday where the young people were asking hilarious questions about the digestive system. I won't tell you what they are, but I loved their curiosity about that. So, how do teachers build curiosity? This is a chance for you to guess the three findings with the person sitting next to you. She found, with her graduate students, three things that the teachers who regularly built curiosity were doing that the other teachers weren't doing. Got the idea? Some were doing it, some weren't. What were those three things? They're quite simple. They're things we can all do. So we want you just to have a few minutes of prediction. We're not going to humiliate you by asking you for your answers. We're just enjoy the conversation. Remember a classroom that helped you be curious and think about what it was like. What was the kind of culture of it? How did it feel? All right, and we're going to go crazy and have 3 minutes. We'll actually time it for you to think about curiosity because it's a good research question. How do
And
we
when
get
you
that
hear the
transformation?
chime, we'll wrap it up.
3 minutes. How do you build curiosity? No, it's not. right, fellow researchers. We want to be evidence-informed. How many people actually talked about curiosity, first of all? You know, it's dark in my classroom here. How many of you talked about curiosity? Oh, some at the back. Excellent. Thank you so much. You made me feel good. Here's the first one. The teacher smiled. So in Canada, we used to say, do not smile until Christmas if you're a teacher. You'll lose control of your class. If we followed that advice, yeah, I can see some people have had that instruction. We were killing curiosity because a smiling teacher sends a different message. I love research like this that we can actually use. There was a beginning teacher in the session yesterday. She's already researching the spiral of inquiry and asking great questions. She's going to Skype at the end of February. You know, she will not enter her career in that way. Number 2, the great reveal. They talked in an encouraging manner. If a kid raised a question and the teacher was kind of on a roll, they didn't say, I'm sorry, Marta, I'm teaching. They said, put that on the wonder wall. They built it in. They did something. And even the ones who were doing hands-on science often were so into their lesson plan that a kid who was curious, they didn't stop and be encouraging. Does that make sense to you? Kind of intuitive sense? Okay, and here's the third one, which I just love, and maybe this one's a little harder, but I think not. It's that the teachers demonstrated curiosity by talking about things that they were interested in and sharing what they love to do. And those stories were particularly powerful if you were teaching a 5-year-old. I saw a sweet little boy yesterday at the school yesterday. He was tired. Talking about a story about yourself when you were that age and how you always felt sleepy. The story isn't as important as the fact that you shared a little bit of who you were as a person. Does that make sense, those 3 findings? Would you say, just show me with a thumbs up or a yep, if you think those are things we could all do and that we could, share in a staff meeting? It would be the same, would it not, for parents? If you want your kids to be more curious, we're working as the whole of Catalan to have kids be more curious because that's going to give them a better life. Smile at your kid, occasionally try to be more encouraging, and tell them little stories about what you were like or what, if you're a grandparent, what your kid was like when they were the same age as the grandkid. These are curiosity-enhancing things. I highly recommend the book. It's called The Hungry Mind. Curiosity Can Become a Hunger, which if it's for a good curiosity is a great thing.
So the link between the point around curiosity and the spiral of inquiry is that we believe that for young people to be curious, they need to be surrounded by adults who are curious. Does that make sense? Okay. And we heard from one of the Spanish teachers that was in the workshop yesterday about the importance of happiness, that we need to demonstrate that our joy of learning and our joy of working together and our own curiosity. So the link for us is how do we create the conditions within our schools for teachers to stay curious and to leave more curious at the end of their careers? Because this is about reaching high quality and high equity for all of our learners. So these are important questions for us to be thinking about. And that leads us to the spiral of inquiry, which is a process of collaborative inquiry designed to build educator curiosity. And we want to acknowledge kind of the roots of this work. This is Professor Helen Timperley, who's from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And she, if you're not familiar with her work, she is the leading researcher and expert on what kind of teacher professional learning actually makes a difference to young people. In our country, we invest a lot of money in professional learning. We have speakers come in, we go to conferences, and very little of that makes a difference. She was looking at what does. And our work with the schools in British Columbia, we are learning and seeing what made a difference. And so we got together with Helen and spent a couple of years designing and thinking through what she's learned and what we've learned. And when we heard her research, we knew that we needed to collaborate. So there was a 3-year, well-supported literacy initiative across New Zealand. Every primary school was involved, focused on reading and writing. And that program brought facilitation, brought resources, brought support, and after 3 years, the program ended, as happens. And her question was, what happens afterwards?
So I'm going to try to make all of these intelligent Catalan educators into a human graph. Are you ready? You need one arm. Okay? So literacy was pretty good in New Zealand. Reading recovery was invented in New Zealand. So the results were kind of like this. They were pretty good. At the end of a few years of focused help with a facilitator and lots of government support, where do you think the results were in the schools? Just show me with your arm. Up. And they stayed up. That was really good. Yes? You like the research so far? Here's what happened for the young people, let's say it was in Barcelona, the young people who came from families where their families hit them, where there wasn't enough to eat, where the sleeping conditions weren't very good. They were like this. The kids who needed the learning the most got the best results if the schools kept the literacy strategies and added the inquiry process. Only then. So when we saw these results, that inquiry, teachers figuring things out together in a collective, and smart strategies, that you got the greatest equity results and it stuck, we thought this is something we need to explore. Does that make sense? Can you just do it with your arm just so that you get that little kinesthetic? Try not to poke the person next to you, but let's see if we can do it cooperatively. Okay? The results were pretty good. They went up and it stuck. But for the kids who needed it most, which are Maori and Pacifica kids and kids in poor communities, they went way up. All right. Why don't we give those New Zealand teachers a round of applause, because they started to inquire. They will feel the vibrations. Yeah.
And then just a little bit of evidence from British Columbia. This was some data that came out a couple of years ago, and it was done by a pretty middle-of-the-road think tank, the Conference Board of Canada, taking a look at how Canada and how our provinces did compared to similar systems in the world. So if you look, Japan, Finland, and then there's British Columbia. In Canada, we are the highest performing system. And these are the measures that they were looking at. The first was in reading and writing, that we have the least number of students who are struggling and the highest number of students at the highest level. We were very satisfied when we heard from one of our leading researchers, Michael Fullen. Is that name familiar to some of you? Yeah. Michael Fullen sent us a text, and he said, that is a network effect. And that was a real acknowledgement because he works in Ontario, and we're from British Columbia. So this was important to us. And then this is the other part, that we have the greatest number of 25-year-olds across OECD countries, not just in Canada, but across OECD countries, with at least 2 years of post-secondary education. That could be chef training, pipe fitting, hairdressing, first year at the University of Barcelona. It's that 2 years is a major predictor of long-term life satisfaction and health outcomes. So we're sharing this not to say, oh, aren't we wonderful? We're sharing this to say we've got the evidence base to say you're on solid ground by taking on this work, and you're part of an international group. So there was another important study done 3 years ago by a researcher from Australia, taking a look at what does professional learning look like in high-performing systems. And these were the systems that they looked at. And you think about Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Singapore, they're very different cultures from the Catalan, very different from Canada. We have much more in common with you than we do with Hong Kong, Singapore, or Shanghai. Well, what they found was that there were elements across these 4 very different systems that were consistent. And this is what they were. So thinking about your approach that your director talked about, that it's inquiry-based, the professional learning, it's collaborative, it's linked and coherent. That means we're working together and working together against some common purposes. That it's led by the profession, and that we'll take our time. Yes? Did you hear that in the comments from your director? You say, aren't we lucky to be working here? Because you are. Okay? So the original work, we worked with Helen. We wrote a longer book. We've written some articles. And the playbook is the distillation of those ideas in a shorter form. And we're just going to walk you through the stages. And we know that some of you in the room already have experience with the spiral. And again, we'll provide some opportunity for you to chat about what you think.
Maybe we could ask, how many of you are so familiar with the spiral of inquiry that you could join us on the stage and talk about the stages? I bet some of you are. I know they are. Yeah, there's
Yay, Marina.
There's, say, Begonia. Where's your other colleague? Where's Vicky? Is she here? Yeah, they're hiding. Oh, there she is. Okay. Well, they will explain it to you over time and in a deeper and more powerful way. But the whole thing is, many forms of school improvement start with information that's very, very far away from the classroom. Sets of PISA results, test results from national agencies. The United Kingdom, England would be a good example of a system like that. But nothing has changed in social mobility. Nothing has changed in more kids having a chance. We work in England with whole education. Their schools are making a difference, but the system of a whole isn't. Teachers don't seem to be motivated by that far distant information. But teachers are motivated by the learners that they work with. So our process starts with looking at what's happening with the learners right in front of us and asking them a few questions.
So the big difference, as Linda said, is that we start by asking what's going on for our learners. We're going to take a look at the data sets. We'll take a look at the assessment information. We will also value teacher observation, teacher judgment, teacher knowledge, and we'll listen to the learners. So we'll talk about the key questions that get this program or process started. But the key thing is that we always come back to asking what's going on for our learners and how do we know? Because we have sat in on all kinds of meetings where teachers talk about the students, principals talk about the students, but it's just their opinion. And we need to be more curious than that by really checking it out.
We wanted to wake up the little 5-year-old boy that we saw in the classroom and say, "Why are you sleeping?" We were quite tired at that time of day. We thought we might join him, but we thought it would be too mean to wake him up. But, we were curious. It was interesting. It was highly engaging artwork that was going on.
So we'll just give a quick example. This is from an English school. And I think I think that all of you can relate to this. There was a class coming through the school that every teacher dreaded. It was, oh no, here they come. Have you ever heard that? Well, we have in Canada. It's, here they are, kind of get ready. And this class was now in year 5, so they were 10 and 11 years old. It was mostly boys. There were 2 teachers working together, and as they were engaging in the spiral of inquiry, they started to say, what's going on? Like, what's going on for these boys? And they asked them. And they asked the boys, how do you see yourselves as learners? What are you learning? Why is it important? And they heard some very powerful language back from the boys who said, we are losers, we're useless, we're bad, nobody likes us, we're bullies. And they took that language that they heard from the boys and they posted it up in the staff room. And as the staff came in and saw this language, they were shocked because it was all of the things they'd said about the boys themselves. Okay? And so they decided that their focus needed to be changing the experiences of the boys. Okay? So their focus became really clear that if they focused on this group of boys and changed their experiences, they hoped they would see an impact. So the second stage of the spiral is to design and to decide what is it that you're going to work on together. And what is it that's going to give you the biggest impact for your learners? And we have hundreds of examples, but we'll just stick with this one as we illustrate it.
Yeah, and for those of you who have had a bit of experience with the spiral, for 10 years, we asked schools to develop an inquiry question. But in Helen Timperley's research in New Zealand, it made no difference whether people took a focus or phrased it as a question. And sometimes the question took so long and got in the way of intelligent action. So we apologize for that decade where we weren't as helpful as we could have been. So simply taking a focus, let's look at those boys and let's see if we can bring their learning to life, was enough animation and enough focus that they could move. Does that make sense to you? Because that was, you could save 10 years if you follow the research. Rewind.
So they got their focus that was changing the experience of the boys. Then they went back and they scanned again. And they asked the boys what would help them in their learning. And they said they wanted to do more with their hands, they wanted to be outside, they wanted to do something useful, and they wanted to be of help. So then they were learning more about this group of boys. Then the next stage in the spiral is hunch. And I know this word doesn't translate perfectly into Catalan. Some words are very culture specific. But hunch in English means it's just a guess. It's just an idea. It's not necessarily the truth, but we need to surface possibilities. And the hunch is around how are we, the adults, the teachers and principals, the educators, contributing to this situation for these students. So it's not around blaming the families or the government or the community or the kids. It's around our actions. So the teachers in this particular school said, we design our day and the kids are sitting in rows working quietly on paper and pencil tasks most of the day. Do we get them involved? Do we listen to them? And so they really had a conversation about their practices that were contributing to these boys being disengaged.
And maybe my hunch, if I was at that school, drawing on the walking curriculum colleague here, maybe my hunch would be, gee, I'm sort of afraid to take the kids outside at the beginning of the day. Afraid I'll lose time from my pressures, and afraid that I won't be able to bring the young people back into an orderly, self-regulated system that I think I've got right now, that's quiet at the beginning of the day, that makes me feel good. That's a hunch. That's about my practices and a little bit about my risk and vulnerability. Putting that out on the table is a very healthy part of this work because we've mostly, both my parents were teachers. Teachers' kids, particularly, I think, we were trained to be perfect. don't make a mistake. And that really then becomes hard to learn because you're so fearful of dropping or not pleasing or whatever. And I think that putting hunches out and saying, maybe my idea when I started teaching 10-year-olds that a really good teacher got them doing reading and math first thing in the day, and it was tough because their brains were the most rested. Maybe that isn't the best way. Maybe it's better to get young people more self-regulated by moving and doing something interested in nature.
So the work of John Ratey from Harvard, he wrote a terrific book called Spark. And it's around how both emotions and learning can be regulated through activity. And one of the key findings was if we have brisk activity, 20 to 30 minutes, where we get our heart rate up, it could be walking fast, it could be going for a run, it could be dancing, at the beginning of the day, that we're much more ready to enter into learning. And so there were a couple of things that these teachers looked at. They looked at so this is the new learning part. They looked at the evidence around regulation, behavior, activity, and emotion. And they also looked at some research on hands-on work for boys. And there's some very good research on that. So they learned some things. So the key part of this is that we're going to learn in areas and in ways that are most appropriate to our focus area. Okay? And that requires some organization within the school. And learning doesn't need to be coming to a conference like this. It could be seeing another school. Maybe it's visiting Yolanda's school and seeing what they're doing with the walking curriculum, or visiting Christina's school and seeing what they're doing with Philosophia. So it could be visiting another school, it could be reading a short article, it could be watching a YouTube clip together, but there is going to be an infusion of some new learning.
And in this case, and I want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's really beautiful, the teachers talked to their whole class. They didn't ignore the 3 girls. They talked to all of them and said, what's something that we can do that would really be helpful to the rest of the school? And so the children interviewed the kindergarten, the 5-year-olds, and discovered that they would like to have 2 kinds of playgrounds. They'd like a playground that sparked their imagination, and they'd like a playground that was kind of more like an adventure. Those 2 can overlap, right? And the young people together, this group, built those 2 playgrounds to the specifications of the 5-year-olds. Well, now all these young people are school heroes. And the reputation of the school has changed in the community because the community had a bad impression of the school because of these kids. And everything changed because of how they acted. So the checking stage.
The checking stage is asking, are we making enough of a difference? So in this case, it was very clear they wanted to change the attitude and the experience of the boys in this school. But it may be something, there may be all kinds of ranges, but the key thing is that we need to know what difference are we trying to make at the focus stage. We're not going to wait until the end. So it's being really, really clear. And then we go back in. So this is a way of professional being. It's not a project. It's really the way that we think, and we know that good teachers and principals work all the time. It's just making it much more explicit. And what we found is that the language and having simple shared language really picks up the pace of change. So in your networks, if one school is working with another, and you can say, well, what have you learned from scanning? You know what you're talking about. Okay? Or if you say, how are you going to check? You've got the common language, so it's that shared framework that really helps pick up the pace. The next really important, well, we'll do this and then we'll give you a chance to talk some more. The really important starting point is listening to learners. And we're going to encourage you to think about 2 big questions. Now, Christina was at the workshop yesterday, and she's already used the questions this morning and has learned something. So, so there's a research base for both of these questions. And our advice is don't ask a question if you're not prepared to act on what you hear. that make sense? Okay. Okay. So the first question comes from the work of Kimberly Schonert-Reichel. She's a researcher at the University of British Columbia, but also is working internationally and is part of the OECD 2030 work. And she's developed a very good survey that's used across all of our schools, but it has a lot of questions in it. And we asked her, if you were just going to ask one question, what would it be? One question that would give us some indication of the experience of learners in our school. And this is it. Can you name 2 adults in this school who believe you'll be a success in life, and how do they show you? Okay. So, how many of you have asked this question? Besides Christina. How many of you agree that this would be important? Okay. Okay. The evidence around this is that if students, if young people, if learners feel a sense of connection and support and confidence in the school, their achievement goes up at least 10%. So there's empirical evidence around the importance of sense of belonging in the school. And another important distinction is this is not 2 people who like you or who care about you or who are nice to you. It's 2 people who believe you'll be a success. And Linda, I wonder if you want to demonstrate. We weren't planning this, but we're going to do it now. So we're in a middle school in British Columbia a couple of years ago, and we decided that we should try this out. So I'm walking down the hall. I meet this young man. Do you have any students that look like this? Okay. He's got his hoodie on, and I say, "Hi, my name is Judy, and I'm visiting your school. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?" Use your type.
Yeah.
Okay. And can you tell me your name?
Jason.
Okay, Jason, great. So we're just really curious. In this school, are there a couple of adults that really believe in you, that kind of have your back?
One.
One, great. And who is that, and what do they do that shows you, tell me about that.
Well, it's my social studies teacher, Mrs. Costanci. Every day I can feel the imprint of her boot on my ass crack.
Did you hear that? Every day he could feel the imprint of her boot on his ass crack. Now, he actually said that. But we probed a little bit further, and we found out that Jason was struggling in school, but he wanted to be a long-distance truck driver, and to do that, you had to have grade 12, and his teacher was determined to get him there, including phoning him, texting him every morning, and checking in with him at the end of the day to make sure that he knew what he needed to do. He interpreted that as her kicking him in the butt, but that's the kind of response that we've heard over and over. It's the teachers that push, that encourage, that are there for, not the ones that say, there, dear, it'll be fine, but rather, we're going to do this together.
Just to be clear, we don't kick our students in Canada, just to be clear. In Sweden, we were talking about BC all the time. They were working in Swedish. The second day, we saw a group of teachers coming in like this. We said, what are they doing? They said, oh, we're learning how to bring Jesus down to the ground. They thought BC meant before Christ. So sometimes there are these little, mistakes.
Okay, so
it's a metaphor.
We, our goal in the network is that every school, 100% of the students will be able to name 2 adults. Okay. And we often get the question, can young children answer this question? And our evidence is that they can. Sometimes it's using pictures because they may not know the names of the staff. We're going to introduce this in a way early on so that they know that the adults are there for them.
Yeah, and if we go back to that school with the grade, the 10-year-olds, or Judy and I also taught secondary, grade 10s are 16-year-olds, usually are very fine people by that stage. 15-year-olds is slightly different. Having young people be the people who ask the questions, having a little bit of explanation about being a good person, what success in life might mean. Like the hummingbird, we consider that a good bird, and if that was a person, that's a good person. Having those kinds of conversations, and then, but getting the evidence, because we cannot afford, as we can see in our democracies, we cannot afford to have young people in school who don't have a sense of belonging. We need to know the ones who don't feel that, and we need to act. Would you agree with that? Like, it's too dangerous to have people who don't feel that they belong in the cultures that we're trying to build. And we can't just take it for granted. So we have to pay attention and do a few things.
So when we ask this question, and if we hear a child say nobody, then we're going to move to immediate action. We're not going to go through a whole spiral of inquiry. We're going to go right from asking that question to action. And the action that we have found, and there's a strong evidence base for this, is what's called 2 by 10. That means that if Linda is in my class and I ask her and I hear she doesn't have a clue and there's nobody that believes in her, I'll make a commitment every day for 10 days in a row, for 2 minutes a day, to find her, have a conversation with her about her interests, her identity, who she is as a person, nothing to do with school. And there's evidence from a very important study in secondary schools in Ontario that showed that when they did this, when they used this systematically, that about 90% of those kids who were disengaged were more on track than they were at the beginning. And what we've heard from some of the teachers who've been working with this is that after the 6th or 7th day, instead of Begonia waiting for me to find her, she'll come and find me, so that the students are seeking out the adults. So it's very, very important. So that's question number 1. Why don't we stop for 1 minute and just a quick conversation. What do you think about this question? Could you ask it? And what would you hope to hear? Your turn to talk.
Oh, dang it.
Okay. This is the next of the 2 key questions. From big national surveys of students at age 15 in Canada, the response has been pretty much consistent that kids are academically engaged in their school. They're doing school work. They're socially engaged. That means they like going to school for the most part. But intellectual engagement, it drops, and it's about 50%. So 50% of the young people in our country say that they find their learning meaningful, relevant, and important. And that is a major challenge. We've found that using the questions from the cognitive research of Helen Timperley and John Hattie provides a very good indication as to whether or not the kids are owning their learning and are actively engaged. Most young people can tell us what they're doing, what the task is, but it's very different when we say, what are you learning in mathematics, in philosophia, in fine arts, in language arts, and why is that important? And we want young people to be able to provide full, rich answers to that question.
Australian schools have a lot of money. So they've made these wonderful badges. I brought 3 of them because they're light to travel with.
Yeah.
And the strings are from Morocco. I recycled them. In Australian language, they say that the sign says, ask me. A young person wears it around his or her neck, goes to somebody that they value in the school, maybe the teacher librarian, maybe the principal, and says, ask me, what am I learning? How am I going? We say, how are you doing? And where to next? We have found that when we first wrote the book, we said ask 4 questions. Now we just say, just ask 2. Because if kids can't say what they're learning and why it's important, it's a waste of time and sort of discouraging to ask them the next 2. If young people, in that school we visited yesterday, I think I could have asked every single young person what they were learning to get better at, whether it was drumming or thinking or artwork or understanding the digestive system. I'm confident that if I'd had enough Catalan to ask them a friendly question, they would have been able to give me a detailed answer. But in many, many schools that we go into, including our own, there are many young people who can't answer the question of what are you learning in mathematics and why is it important, and don't have a clue that people do math outside of school. They might say it's important because we have to do more next year to get us ready. That's a disappointing answer. We want to learn how to, as a profession, really say why it's important to write persuasively and how that can help us build a better nation. You know, whatever it is, it has to be at that big idea, and it has to be, why would we want to do that? Does that make sense to you? Like, it's just going over our kids' heads because of, I think, digital media, and also because we have a hunch that we haven't spent enough time on that part. To say the big idea of what we're doing is to learn about the digestive system so we can make intelligent decisions about what we'll dine on, right? And that might be important for life or death, depending on the individual human being. Does that make sense? A bit more time on the big ideas and why. And then, absolutely, with Merce's help, you know, the whole assessment for learning repertoire then helps you answer the question, you know, how am I going? And you want to hear that the kid understands sustainability. The school in Morocco was working on that. And what's your next step? Well, I'm taking what I've learned at school into my household, and I'm changing the way we recycle there. Does that make sense? It's this big idea over and over and over again, checking to see if they're on track with us.
So we had the opportunity of visiting this school yesterday with Rosa and Christina, and we saw a video, and I don't know if it's publicly available, but it was a terrific video about young people. I think they were probably 11, 12 years old, really looking at gender differences and equity challenges. And I am confident that if we asked them what they were learning and why is it important, we would have gotten very rich answers. The challenge for us to do is to ask. Because we were working in a school in Darwin, we're not going to show you this, but they had a focus on math. They'd forgotten to ask the kids. When they went back, they found out that all of their effort, and the students still didn't have a clue why what they were learning in mathematics was important. So now their focus is on understanding and relevance in mathematics, not just the mechanical part of mathematics. Does that make some sense? Okay, so we really want you to think about asking this question. Linda was in a school, we both had a chance to visit schools in Marrakesh last week, and this was a school that had a focus on sustainability. And again, real confidence that the students understood why it was important, but we won't know unless we ask.
Also, if you look at the picture of the girl on the right, they also, at around grade 5 or grade 6, 10 or 11, they changed their emphasis from learning the language to speaking the language with passion. And so our guides, where you can see, she cares about sustainability. They had a big conference 2 years ago in Morocco, and they've really taken it to heart in the school. 1,200 environmental scientists. They were just totally enthused about this, and we were blown away. And apparently, they learned what they were doing from the Toronto School Board, who has an eco program that I found online. I thought, well, isn't this cool? We're working together across countries to try to have the earth not heat up so much that it becomes not a place to live.
So the last point we want to make before we give you an opportunity to pose some tricky questions is the notion of the importance of networks and perseverance. We have found in our work, initially in British Columbia, but now in many, many places, that in every school there is some terrific practice taking place. And what we do not do very well is learn from those practices. Okay. And so part of our work has been dedicated to finding those people who really care the most about quality and equity, and give them a space where they can learn from each other and deepen and extend their work. So we have persevered with this. We encourage you to persevere. We have worked with over the last 20 years, we've had multiple government changes. We've gone from left to right to mixed up center. But it's the networks and the goodwill of people working together that has allowed us to sustain it. And, again, we just love the image of the human castels and how we have to work together, and how many times they practiced. And how many times they must have fallen down, and how many bruises they must have to create this.
I just like to make a comment too, and this is a shout out to the department. You know what? The people at the base, building that base that's stable, that's together, that's side by side, not above and below, and then the teachers who scamper up to the top with some agility and fragility, counting on the fact that the system of the performance will hold them up. Our guides, Begonia Marina, said that they certainly wouldn't let their children run up there. It's terrifying to watch, and change can be scary. So I think the fact that you've got such a well-organized progression, building on the networks that you've already created, to us that's very encouraging. And when it all works, it's a beautiful thing. And I particularly like the community, where they didn't do it as a competition. They just did it as, this is our spirit of working together and taking a risk and building something beautiful. I think that's the spirit that we want to build our networks in. So we loved that day when we got to experience that Catalan magic.
We are learning a lot from you, the Sardana and the castle, just as metaphors. And we want to share one big learning from our culture, from British Columbia and from our First Peoples, we have a series of 7 principles of learning that go side by side with the OECD principles of learning. But the most important one for this work is that learning takes patience and time. And that in education, we have seen the desire for quick fixes to get on to the next big thing. You've got the idea, the next program that's going to solve all of our problems, and none of that works. What does work is us taking our time, working together, and sticking with it. So we love this image. We love the work of Joan Miro. And what you're doing just matters so much that you are going to keep at it. And beautiful things will happen.
Yeah, I like it that the Miro, micro Miro, but a network of Miros is on the stage with us, because he's always been one of my favorite artists. I just want to say that this is your chance now. You've been talking to the person next to you. We're going to get some chairs up here, and hot seat questioning, we're supposed to know something about this, so we'll take whatever questions you ask. We'll try not to give long answers, because that's kind of boring. But if you ask short questions, we'll give short answers that might help. But this will give you a chance to talk while we're getting organized. We'll give the things away at the end. If you look at the person next to you and you think, well, this has been interesting, but there might be somebody more intellectually attractive to me behind me, feel free to have them join in your conversation for the next few minutes. It's just an invitation. You're probably sitting beside somebody you like, but just talk to somebody for a few minutes and see if you can generate a shared question. Okay?
And then Begonia's going to help moderate this with us. That's why there's 3 hot seats up here. Okay. Share the microphone. Yeah, we'll share the microphone. Yeah.
No, I don't. I got too excited here.
Moltes gràcies a tots per ser aquí. Is it on? Yes. I want to thank you for your curiosity. Gràcies per la vostra curiositat, per ser aquí, per compartir aquesta energia. I ara se suma a l'equip la balladora de sardanes més famosa de la sala. La Linda i Judy van estar aquí per la Mercè i molta gent feia pont i Marina Gai i jo les vam portar a les festes de la Mercè i elles van trobar metàfores per tot arreu i les van capturar. I ha estat una sorpresa que els agraïm perquè han fet com una connexió amb la cultura. Els va encantar veure que hi havia persones de totes les edats a la sardana i que era un ball molt inclusiu. I jo les vaig convidar a ballar, però serà la propera vegada. Doncs, si vosaltres ja teniu algunes preguntes, hi ha persones amb el micròfon, procureu que siguin curtes i si no és així, jo puc llançar la primera. Hi ha alguna pregunta ja preparada? Sí? Endavant. Susana, directora d'institut.
Hola, moltes gràcies, donar-los moltes les gràcies per tot el que hem escoltat. Jo els volia preguntar, degut a que elles tenen aquesta experiència d'haver anat a tants països i haver vist tants projectes educatius de país, quina és la diferència més gran que elles veuen amb el de Catalunya? O sigui, segons la seva experiència i veient el nostre, com nosaltres tenim el sistema educatiu i a partir del que hem vist en altres llocs, inclús per on creuen elles que hauríem de començar per fer aquesta transformació?
Well, that's an easy one. Yes and yes. Our main thing is do get started. And we would say, I'm going to do the different second. I'd say get started by asking young people the questions. We found that genuinely transformative, no matter where we've been. Because for some reason, we've left learners out of our systems by asking them directly. Sometimes we have, councils and things in secondary, but actually asking every kid changes teachers and principals forever. I think you may think this is a strange answer, but I think in some ways, we didn't talk about the fact that the spiral is in use in Kenya, in the largest refugee camp in Kenya, in Dadaab. And there, secondary age students are being trained as teachers by the university in Kenya and by our university as a team. And when you think of the lives of those families and those professors who are helping those young people learn to be certified teachers, they're getting a dual certificate, then I think it makes the rest of our developed countries, our global north, which Catalan is a part of, makes our work look easier. And the quality of the education that they're getting in that camp is so good that the families who've been able to move back to their home have moved back to the camp because the young people are getting a really high quality education. And I think that, I mention that because I think using the energy of young people to teach each other and to interview each other is a very underused resource. And so I think what's the same in Catalan, we haven't got enough of a sample, and yesterday we heard from a few Madrid people, is, and if we use the elementary school as an example, beautiful work on philosophy for children. Those young people know how to think. Is there a well-organized way of them coming to your school and continuing to learn to think? Or are people here saying, well, you're in high school now, we do it the way we've usually done it? And I don't know, we don't know enough about Catalan to know whether those linkages are continuing so that young people can get the thinking competencies they need, because it takes a long time to build what we see, and it needs to be continued. So we would need to have more dialogue about that.
Yeah, I'll just come in with a couple of points. It is great that you've got the government support for this work. And it is also great that your government understands that they can't control it. And I say that because we've worked in some places where it has become, networks have been mandated and schools have been forced into networks that maybe not suit them. So there's that place of support, facilitation, but not mandating that everybody does it. What we found is that the learning grows as we get the strong examples rather than forcing. So whether that fits in your context, I don't know, but that's been important for us. The other point is, and it's building on what Linda said about secondary, is that we want to see primary and secondary schools working together, that in your networks, for us, we've seen it's been less effective when the networks have been exclusively primary or exclusively secondary. We need to be thinking more as a whole system.
I think the other, we said we give short answers, but I just have to do a big shout out. Is there any place more beautiful and more interesting and more fabulous as a culture than Catalonia? No. This is the most fabulous culture, and you've created it for your work over time. So the next step, the network step, how exciting to just take all that energy and really move young people forward. I mean that quite sincerely. I've always loved. I saw the Sardana many decades ago and fell in love with it. So.
Linda, Kaser i Judy Halbert han escrit aquest llibre, Leadership Mindsets. Aquí hi ha la veu de molts directors i directores, també de professors, d'equips de professors, i es parla molt en aquest llibre de formal leaders and informal leaders. Els líders, no sé com traduir-ho, formals o informals, i voldria preguntar què fa que en una escola tots els educadors es converteixin en informal leaders. Qui té aquesta clau o aquesta responsabilitat perquè això passi? I com marca la diferència que només el director o la directora tingui la big picture o que tot el claustre tingui la big picture o el propòsit d'on anem?
This is a really interesting question, Begonia. I think that the keys are, Judy and I have both been principals. As principals, we need to learn to take a small step back, it's a Sardana step, and allow the person in the circle who's ready, and every school has those 2 or 3 or 4 teachers. Sometimes it's the school secretary. Leadership comes from many places, to let their leadership blossom. And that means that we call them the informal teacher leaders. They need a chance to express who they are because they're ready to do that. And so if you are too controlling as a principal and you feel that you have all of the big picture, you're probably not as good at cultivating curiosity. And you need to open up some space for those teacher leaders to say, I want to bring this to the learning party. I'm thinking about this. Michael Fullan has a new book called Nuance. It's a very good book, and it shows some principals who are able to do that.
I think one of the most important things that the formal leader can do is to make themselves vulnerable by trying something and sharing what they're doing. So there's some wonderful research on trust, and it says the person with the most power, real or perceived, in the hierarchy needs to be the person that makes themselves vulnerable first. So if we link it back to the spiral, it would be the formal leader asking some questions, the formal leader raising some hunches, the formal leader being curious about what's going on. And that provides the space for the informal leaders who maybe have been reluctant to participate to come in because they know that there'll be trust.
Yolanda has another question.
Hi. Here in Catalonia, we're experiencing that there's a big push from families to be every day more and more involved in school matters. And we would like to know in which point of the spiral should we involve them, in the scanning or in developing hunches? What would you suggest?
Oh, that's also a great question, and thank you for that. The research on curiosity, the stance towards families has to be the same. We have to smile at them, we have to look interested, and we have to share personal stories. My doctorate was in how can you get families and staffs working together and what makes the biggest difference. And I think, again, if you have those confident teachers, showing the videotapes of what you're doing, involving them in the scanning, involving them before you choose the focus. Say, we think it's really important to work on being powerful writers, and we also think it's really important to work on sustainability. Dear parent, ask the kids to ask them, so there's not a lot of pieces of paper, but use the kids as a survey and say, which of those two would be most important to you? What do you think? Just, we're making this decision. We want to hear what you have to say. And then the strongest strategy for parent involvement that our school tried, every single one, was to actually invite families in, even if it's like a grandparent or an aunt that comes, to watch 10 minutes of the learning. All they have to do is be a witness, and then give them really good coffee, tea, too early in the day to give them wine, but you get the feeling, to share a little food together, a little tapas and a little beverage. And they are amazed because they don't see school, they only hear what's going on. Oh, and one last thing, every day, at the end of every day for 5 minutes, train your kids to answer the question, what went well for you today, Yolanda? So that when Yolanda goes home and parents say, how was school? She remembers that she really loved the sustainability lesson. That's it, Mike.
Yeah. And I think that there are some very simple things that schools can do, or that we've seen schools do. One is sharing. So one of our school districts, to all of the families, these are the 2 key questions. We're asking these questions regularly. This is why we're asking them. And feel free to ask your children at home. It created an expectation that was really important. The second is one of the schools, when we've got big ideas that we want to impart, let's say growth mindset, one of the most effective ways that we've seen is when parents come to pick up their children at the end of the day, like we saw yesterday, there were all kinds of parents out there to pick up their kids. Ask them to come 5 minutes early, occasionally have a session in the classroom where the older kids are providing babysitting for the younger kids, and teach them 1 or 2 things that they can follow up on home. And every Friday, some schools send out texts saying, this is the question that we'd like to ask you to ask your children over the weekend. So we're creating that culture of curiosity throughout. And in the scanning, absolutely, one of our schools involved parents, teachers, and older students in interviewing the younger children, and then getting together and having a conversation about what they heard and why it mattered. So you're on to a very important aspect, Yolanda, and I think it's how to engage parents so that they're actually focused on supporting the learning of their children rather than getting involved so that they feel that they can run the school.
One other thing, a couple of growth mindset examples. Some schools in British Columbia have had very good success reading little bits of growth mindset in a book club with their families by using that. The kindergarten teacher was in the lead. She did we're using growth mindset. And then one principal in England, they were doing growth mindset. She had grown up, it was a very tough community. And every Friday, she sent home electronically to every parent, we're working on the growth mindset. Your children need to believe that they can learn. And over the weekend, I want you all to practice saying yet, because we're teaching, I can't do that yet at school, and we need your help. And in that way, she was helping all the families learn a growth mindset without it being, pages and pages of reading for them. I thought that was very sophisticated and kind.
Us estan venint més preguntes al cap, segurament. Hi ha una cosa que m'agradaria compartir. És un marc de Graham Nuthall sobre l'aprenentatge i parla de 3 mons de l'aprenentatge. Parla del món públic, que és el que ha passat avui aquí, amb un coneixement que hem compartit, però un segon món que és semiprivat, que és el món de la conversa entre iguals, que és el que elles també han promogut i el que es promou a les trobades de professors i a les xarxes. Un món semiprivat és entre iguals. Imagineu els vostres alumnes parlant entre ells, construint significats entre ells. I un tercer món, que diu Graham Nuthall, que és el món de la veu interior, el món privat de la veu interior. El que continuarà quan marxarem i el que us continuarà parlant del que heu sentit aquí avui. I el primer és el que ens porta al engagement, a la motivació, a sumar totes aquestes energies, estar aquí junts avui, que ens ha fet molta il·lusió trobar-nos, saludar-nos i retrobar-nos. El segon, ens ajuda a construir el coneixement amb els altres, a dir què significa per tu aquesta paraula, què significa per mi, i acordar si parlem el mateix idioma i usem les mateixes paraules si signifiquen el mateix. I el tercer és el que ens mou a l'acció. Ens parlem a nosaltres mateixos, ens donem ordres i ens movem cap a una direcció. I jo estava escoltant la conferència pensant que ens movem cap a la mateixa direcció, però que necessitem que cadascú sigui qui es doni ordres a ell mateix. És a dir, que la manera sostenible de fer això i de que sigui per tothom és que cadascú sigui aquest líder informal, compromès amb els seus alumnes i que sap el que és bo pels seus alumnes, ho comparteixi amb els companys i tots anem cap al mateix lloc. No és una pregunta, és un comentari, perquè aquest silenci vostre no vol dir que no tingueu preguntes, tots som mestres, sabem què vol dir el silenci i hem de deixar que hi hagi silenci, perquè en el silenci hi ha elaboració també. I segur que ara apareixen més preguntes. I si no, jo puc continuar explicant-vos el que vam aprendre a Vancouver. Curiosament hi ha un districte, there's one. Després us explico això.
Podríeu afegir més accions concretes que poguessin fer l'aula per aconseguir fer un canvi de mentalitat, aquest que esteu comentant? Com la conversa que heu dit sistematitzada.
There are countless examples on the website, not on our website, but if you Google growth mindset, you'll see terrific examples. I think one of the most powerful things that we've seen is where, you know that one slide that had the language? Is when the language is posted, and instead of saying, I can't do this, say, I can't do this yet, this is too hard, I need to get some help to try a little bit more. So there's things around just simple language and helping children change the language and helping them correct each other's language when they hear each other saying, I can't do this, or too hard, or I give up. So just really simple strategies. And then modeling it ourselves is probably the most important.
I think starting every day in a circle and starting with a positive question, teaching a little bit about the mindset, about how you can grow your brain, and giving some examples of athletes and different people who've tried things. Talking about a time when you thought you couldn't and that you did, and then just having young people quickly go around and identify something that they're going to try that day, that they're going to try to bring a growth mindset to. That done regularly transforms classrooms. We have one district that does that. Every person does it every day, and that place now is getting close to 100% of their young people graduating, and a few years ago they weren't. So these small micro moves that seem very small, standing in a circle, everybody taking a turn, always a positive frame. What are you trying? What's next? Here's what happened to me, those little personal things at the beginning of the day. It's a transformation.
Hola. Aprofito que esteu aquí també perquè m'agradaria comentar la idea que porta l'espiral d'indagació és la idea de l'honestedat, la transparència, perquè el que fa és justament compartir significats des d'aquests valors. I això suposa també, crec que heu parlat de l'èxit de l'alumne, és finalment que la indagació que es fa mirant les necessitats de l'alumne és perquè el mateix alumne acabi podent parlar d'allò que aprèn. M'agradaria que parléssiu de la relació entre l'espiral d'indagació i el fet d'ajudar-nos a comprendre el que representa l'avaluació formativa, formadora. És a dir, que l'alumne sigui capaç de parlar dels objectius, dels criteris d'avaluació a partir d'aquest ús de l'espiral d'indagació a través de la vostra experiència. Gràcies.
I want to pick up, Mercedes, on the idea of honesty and transparency. we're in the public system in British Columbia, and that's where usually the non-rich families are. So we are very proud to be public educators. We define ourselves that way. That's our identity. One of the public schools that was in the network the first year, they set a writing goal. They wanted to get very good at writing, and they were using new learning progressions in writing. And at the end of the year, they found out that the young people were not one shred better as writers than they were at the beginning. Now, instead of hiding that from the rest of the network, they explored it. And what had happened is that in the year, they had gotten much, much better at having common, shared professional judgments about what good writing looked like. So in fact, the writing had improved, but what had improved the most was teachers' ability to judge and coach learners. The next year, writing went like that. So I think it's really important, we think it's really important, to tell the truth. No shame, no blame, no fame. Just figure it out, check, have the conversation, and then act. And if I had to pick one transforming strategy from all the different things that we could do, I would pick assessment for learning, and I would have every family watch Austin's Butterfly as that young boy learns to make a better scientific drawing. Because I think it shows families, and it shows learners, and it shows teachers what the process looks like, and that we are going for quality. That's what we're going for, as well as equity. And getting those learning progressions, those micro-learning progressions. It's January. The whole world is making big resolutions that they won't do, but making those small moves, micro moves, towards something stronger is a power that we haven't used to its full extent.
When we first started the network 20 years ago, our focus was entirely on formative assessment. We had learning progressions provided by the ministry in reading, writing, math, problem solving, and social responsibility. And the challenge and the opportunity that we were given was how to get teachers to voluntarily use these resources. And that's where we started the work. And we have not left that. So that question, what are you learning and why is it important, is directly connected to the first big strategy of formative assessment around learning intentions. The next question, how's it going? If students don't have the criteria, they can't answer that question. And then what's your next step? If they haven't had the coaching feedback, they can't do it. So we have pretty well embedded in our schools in British Columbia now the notion of formative assessment and coaching for learning. That's one of the big strategies of the nature of learning. We've known that research since 1998 when it first came on. And we say to our grad students, where we have some power, we say, if we have the knowledge that assessment for learning leads to a big gain for our learners and we're not using it, that's the educational equivalent of malpractice, which sounds pretty harsh, but we can get away with that in our place. But we've got the knowledge around formative assessment. We know it matters. And one of the best descriptions of how we need to unlearn our assessment practices to create the space for new learning was the work that Begonia, Merce, Victoria, and Marina provided last year in Norway. So the world is learning from the way you're thinking here in Barcelona, but we couldn't agree with you more about the importance of that. We know that if we provide the coaching feedback to learners and put a mark on it, we're wasting our time. We need to just be providing the feedback that helps them see what their next step is. Does that make sense?
It's only malpractice after you've heard about it, and then you say, well, I don't care. That's the equivalent to us of going to a Barcelona hospital, and the sign is on the wall, and it says, we're improving in hand washing, and only 85% of the people are washing their hands. It's not a comfort. We think schools where 100% of staff are giving the big learning intentions, saying the meaning of what they're teaching, and then providing coaching, feedback, environment, that's a much better place for people to learn, and it always has been. But those of us who are very experienced, I was an English teacher. When I started my career, I went home every weekend and I spent 20 hours marking essays. And when I learned the assessment for learning repertoire, I was a much happier and better teacher. So I think we model all of the assessment for learning strategies when we teach our graduate students, and they enjoy them, and so then they do them too.
Hi ha temps per alguna pregunta més, si voleu. Mentrestant, voldria afegir dues coses. Abans us deia que al districte de Delta, a British Columbia, l'espiral d'indagació es fa servir al 100% de les escoles. Han arribat a totes les escoles, però a tres nivells. A nivell d'aula, a nivell d'escola sencera, és a dir, el director o la directora amb el seu equip decideix què volen millorar per aquell curs. Seria un nivell meso, nivell micro, meso. I a nivell de districte, el propi districte es planteja una espiral per tot l'any i per tot el districte. I el que vam veure també allà, vam tenir l'oportunitat d'anar, és que els propis alumnes han integrat el llenguatge de l'espiral d'indagació en el seu propi aprenentatge i en la seva vida. És a dir, que al final es converteix en una bastida per tothom, en una bastida de pensament per la millora de tothom i per l'aprenentatge de tothom. I l'altra cosa que no volia deixar de dir, en pantalla ha sortit contínuament la web de les Networks of Inquiry and Indigenous Education i hi ha una pestanya que diu Case Studies, on des de fa temps comparteixen els esquemes, és molt esquemàtic, els estudis de les espirals d'indagació d'allà. Hem traduït algunes al català i les hem fet servir a les xarxes i és una eina d'aprenentatge. La novetat és que hi haurà una pestanya per Catalunya, de fet ja hi és, per tant podeu compartir les vostres espirals d'indagació, els traductors tradueixen, per tant tothom les podrà llegir en l'idioma que vulgui i us convidem a compartir-les perquè tots aprenem de tots. Nosaltres hem après dels seus estudis de cas i segurament potser pengeu una espiral i algú us escriu i us diu molt interessant, nosaltres hem fet això i comencem a connectar-nos.
So I think Linda and I will be happy to respond individually if you want to get in touch with us. Any of our people in our networks it's all about sharing and learning and supporting one another. So we really appreciate, muchas gracias for you being here. And we really wish you well on your journey over the next few years. And we know we're going to learn so much from what you do. So I'd like to thank Begonia, thank the director, and thank all of you for your interest in this work.
And I would just, I've said I've always loved Barcelona and the Catalonian area. From our Indigenous people said from time immemorial, for a long time. I've loved this area, so it's just a joy to be here. I personally think you invented tapas. I know the Spanish think they had something to do with it, but I think it's more, a Barcelona thing. And it's just such a great place to be.